Welcome to the Frankopod, a podcast stitched together from the corpses of mystery, noir and Gothic literature and cinema. I'm Morgan, and Brent is out setting a light show in the middle of nowhere today, so it's just me, I'm afraid. I am not an expert, and feel free to correct me nicely on any of this. The podcast is an evolving beast, and I will happily revisit any of the ideas and texts we look at. Before our release next week, I thought it might be a good idea to have a bit of a chat about Gothic literature and exactly what that entails. I am not assuming that everyone knows or doesn't know about the Gothic genre, and this certainly won't be a deep dive because I'm simply not qualified. This is just to define the parameters of the initial genre we will be focusing on with Frankenstein and the Picture of Dorian Gray. First off, we need to acknowledge that the Gothic genre is super problematic. There are stories that give a strong voice to people of all shapes, sizes, gender identifications, sexual orientations, and nationalities. But this progressiveness is a recent development. Gothic literature can be racist, homophobic, and is frequently classist and misogynist. Whilst we could dismiss these issues as being products of the time in which they were written, I think it's important that we are aware of the problems in the things that we love. The only way we can move forward is to understand the issues of our past. Frankenstein, for example, is classist, misogynist, and racist. It is also my favourite novel of all time, but I completely acknowledge its flaws. Okay, let's get into the bare bones overview of Gothic literature. Particularly popular in the 18th and 19th century, Gothic literature typically draws on the spectre of an evil from the distant past that threatens to reach forward and destroy the present. Bram Stoker, for example, creates a particularly threatening creature who oozes ancient evil in Dracula. With vampire myths existing in almost every culture, some tied to the Bible, some tied to ancient Egyptian mythology, Bram Stoker had a wealth of ancient evil to draw from. His count is descended from Attila the Hun, and is himself a spectre of ancient evil, or at least medieval evil, being virtually immortal himself and existing for so long. He has been around for centuries, but Bram Stoker's narrative allows him to venture into Victorian industrialised society. The predatory sexuality of Dracula is one of the most blatant examples of the corruption of the innocent, a trope that is revived again and again in Gothic literature. He preys on young, vulnerable and virginal women in the same way that monsters of his kind will do over and over again in the novels that we cover. But the innocent does not have to be a young virginal woman. The good Dr. Jekyll is his own kind of innocent and is corrupted in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The innocent Dorian is corrupted by his own vanity, Sir Henry, and a supernatural lack of accountability. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, it is usually a girl or a woman who gets the short end of the stick. Even in contemporary Gothic tales, the innocent versus the beast is trotted out regularly. Look at Buffy and Twin Peaks. I promise this will not become a Twin Peaks podcast, but that won't be the last reference to that series that you will get. Often, Gothic literature features mysterious castles, decrepit houses, and labyrinthine monasteries. Horace Walpole's novel, The Castle on Otranto, is commonly cited as the first Gothic novel, which is its whole ridiculous story that we will get into another episode. The Castle on Otranto has a lot of the features that would become prevalent in the Gothic novels that would come after it. An old castle, a family curse, the corruption of the innocent, the supernatural, and the sublime. When we get into the etymology of the word goth, it does allude to a mysterious Scandinavian people who only really come into the verifiable historical record in the 1st century AD. And this part of the story I am horrifically underqualified to talk about, even more so than everything else I've been talking about. If you know a lot about the Goths, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, any of that stuff, please get in touch. Absolutely willing to revisit this. All I know is that as a teenage Goth, it was a source of very real and deep disappointment that the Goths were not pale-skinned, eyeliner-wearing, robed people with black hair lounging around nonchalantly waiting for the cure to be formed. The Gothic became a pejorative term, as far as architecture was concerned, to dismiss architectural design that was ugly or barbaric, which is a little harsh, not to mention more than a touch racist. I know basically nothing about this aspect of the Gothic, so again, if you know your way around Gothic architecture, please get in touch. Gothic literature, however, has a lot more to do with the emergence of the Goth subculture as we know it. So a lot of the tropes that you will see in Gothic literature you can find mimicked in the Goth subculture. But all of this does come from a central root. This architectural notion of the terrible, dramatic and brutal is carried over into the Gothic as it pertains to literature, with Gothic plots being frequently brutal and dramatic in their content. Gothic literature also blurs the lines between the natural and the supernatural. The Gothic does not require a ghost or ghoul, but it does need an analogous threat. In fact, some of the most ambiguously supernatural Gothic novels are some of the most troubling. In The Picture of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde's protagonist does not have to wrestle with a literal physical monster, but with his own bargain with a malevolent force. And in Henry James' Turn of the Screw, we never conclusively find out if the governess is actually experiencing a haunting or a psychotic break. Stemming from the romantic supernatural Gothic novel is the detective novel, which dabbles in the macabre and the mysterious. These stories might start with a supernatural interpretation, such as in Sherlock Holmes novels, and are shown, eventually, by the genius detective to be wholly natural, however improbable. The blurring of the Gothic and the detective novel is particularly prevalent in The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle, in which we get an appearance of the moors, which feature so heavily in Gothic fiction, as they are like naturally occurring labyrinthine castles full of mystery and unpleasant surprises. When we're talking about Gothic film, the Gothic film genre is closely tied with horror, as it often features a lot of evil, death and destruction. However, it is also closely tied with the genre of the period drama, as the movies that draw inspiration from the classic Gothic novels often keep their narratives within the same time as the original story. So what makes Frankenstein Gothic? Well, apart from the fact that it happened on a dark and stormy night, Victor Frankenstein is beholden to a deep ancient desire to create life from whole cloth. The Doctor's drive to emulate God has a lineage tracing back to ancient Greece. Shelley even renders the curse of the Doctor explicit in the title of the novel, Frankenstein, or the modern-day Prometheus. The Prometheus myth is a huge thing to unpack, so I might have to do that another time. The creature of the novel is not born of God, so while he is a creature of science, and consequently science fiction, he is also a supernatural innocent that seeks to find his way in the world. There is corruption of the innocent, death, and the fall of a great noble family. So let's create a bit of a Gothic wish list. So what do you need, ideally, for a Gothic novel or film? Not all novels will have these characteristics, but this is the wish list. So you need death, mystery, a haunting, a curse, a challenge to the conventional, an artifact imbued with magic or supernatural properties, the corruption of the innocent, creepy architecture, preferably a labyrinth of some kind, and an ancient evil. Bats and ambiguous shadows optional. Okay, so that's it. I'll see you next week with Brent to compare the 1931 movie Frankenstein and the 1818 novel. And we will officially apply the concepts of galvanism to the unsuspecting creature that is our podcast. How could this possibly go wrong?